The NFL draft is over. We've got something to say about it. Shedeur Sanders in a free fall. What caused it? Plus, what do we make of the SEC and the Big Ten, especially their dominance in the first round, and our big takeaways? I'm John Canzano. You can read me at johncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. You can find him at wilnerhotline.com. Let's start with the hottest topic of the draft. It became the story. Shedeur Sanders in a free fall. Doesn't go in the first round, second round, third round. He ends up at 144 to the Cleveland Browns. Wilner, what were you thinking as that happened, and what do you make of all the discussion?
Well, early this morning, I got a text message from my sister who lives on the East Coast and doesn't really follow football. And she's like, "What's going on with Shedeur Sanders?" And that's when I knew, man, this has really gone way beyond the normal bounds of the football fandom here and become a big story. And kind of everything with the Sanders family and Colorado is a big story. I was not a big fan of his. I didn't think he should be picked in the first round. I didn't think he was good enough, and certainly not good enough to justify all the circus that you got to put up with when you're drafting him, and you're drafting his attitude, and you're drafting Dion and all that attention, right? And NFL teams don't like all that attention on one player, especially a backup quarterback, which seems to be what a lot of teams thought he was going to be.
Yeah, I think we have to start really by putting the race baiting part of this aside.
Yeah, good point.
I heard people trying to make it about race. It really isn't. You look at the top of the draft and you see Cam Ward and you see Travis Hunter and you see Abdul Carter and, Shedeur Sanders is falling down the draft boards. I think it becomes more about the NFL being a meritocracy. Like the general managers in the league, they're not going to pass on a player that they know can help them win games. And he's just not a player that they know can help them win games. Like he is an intriguing player. He's got some upside. He certainly has some moxie and he's tough. But I don't think that Shedeur is, if the question is the juice worth the squeeze? I think the NFL GMs get to the end of the first, second, and third round, and there's just too many really good players that can help them win games on the board. And then you start thinking about the entitlement, the circus, the questions if he's not starting, his dad, out there and talking about it. And I think that starts to hurt his case. Now, do you put some of this on Coach Prime, the reason Shedeur falls down the board?
For sure I did, because Dion was part of the decision-making process in the pre-draft window, right? And so you got a prospect who doesn't have an elite arm, doesn't have great mobility, great size, right? He's super tough. I think he throws accurately, anticipates well. But there were some questions about him just from a talent standpoint. And they didn't go to the Senior Bowl. And he didn't, he very much picked and chose what kind of workouts he did, where he did them, who he interviewed with, didn't interview with. It was like Dion and Shedeur were dictating to the NFL, here's what we're doing, here's where we want to go. And that just wasn't going to play for a prospect who had flaws, right? He was going to have to be the clear-cut number one quarterback in order to overcome all those issues and more, and convince teams to pick him in the first round.
Yeah, the NFL has proven that, if you have baggage, they'll take you. If you can play, they'll take you. But not good enough to be a guy who acts like that, right? And the entitlement thing is interesting to me because some of this I don't put on Shedeur. He's born into a family where his dad is primetime. His dad is Deion Sanders, and so this is like Barry Bonds being born into the clubhouse. With Bobby Bonds being a star in Major League Baseball. So some of this I don't put on Shedeur. But, I interviewed Shedeur in 2023 one-on-one. I was there in Vegas at Pac-12 Media Day, and I had a chance to sit down with Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders and Caleb Williams and Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix. I have to tell you, Wilner, I went back and listened to those interviews, and Caleb Williams, very polished, engaged, had great media coaching. Michael Penix Jr., authenticity, talked about his family. Cam Ward, just the humility of Cam Ward and how smart he is. And Shedeur's interview, it was everything I could muster with every ounce of journalistic integrity as I'm interviewing this guy. And he's looking at his phone. He won't make eye contact. He's being unnecessarily combative. He's signaling to me in a number of ways, I don't need to be here. I don't want to do this interview. And I'm kind of slogging through the interview, just trying really hard to get him engaged. It was everything I could do to just not end the interview. And I kind of wondered, as those reports were surfacing about how poorly he interviewed with general managers.
Yes.
Did he think he was above it? Did he think, I don't need these guys? I'm going to get picked, no matter what, someone's going to pick me. I don't know, but I couldn't help but think about it.
Well, there was a report that somebody referenced a Rick Neuheisel anecdote from the weekend. Neuheisel said an NFL coach told him that during a pre-draft interview with Shedeur on Zoom, Shedeur got a phone call and took the phone call. He's on with an NFL head coach and he took the phone call. Yeah. But, we've seen it repeatedly with him. The antics after the ASU game where he's flashing his jewelry at the ASU students, after the Colorado State game where he refused to shake hands with the Colorado State quarterback. He just comes across as kind of a turd, right? Yeah. An entitled turd. And clearly a lot of NFL teams felt that as well. And the fact that they were so, resistant in the pre-draft plan when there aren't that many teams that need quarterbacks too, right?
Yeah.
The demand isn't that great. He's not a must-have talent. And then they act the way they act. And this is the result, right? Now, maybe he goes to Cleveland and wins a strange job. If he wins it, good for him, prove it. That's
clearly
fine.
At 144, he's a value, right? Like he's a value pick at 144. And you already have selected Dillon Gabriel, who, by the way, blew everyone away with his interview. And that's why, there's an apples and oranges comparison here. Now, there's still a chance for Shedeur to come back. There's been lots of quarterbacks. Joe Montana taken in the 3rd round. Tom Brady. Come on, we know the story. Yep. You don't have to be a first-round pick, and it doesn't guarantee your success. But I think this is a good case study. I think for future QBs who are trying to figure out how to approach the draft, this is a case study on what not to do and how not to conduct yourself. Right. And the pro day they manufactured that was really of their own doing, and it's all hype and it's all show. And I think it just turned everybody off to the point where NFL GMs were like, look, this is a great draft. It goes too deep with, players were picked in the 6th and 7th round that have tremendous upside. Yes. It's just too deep. It's too competitive to take a flyer on a guy that you just don't want to deal with.
Well, certainly if you don't think he's good enough to start, you don't want that circus surrounding your backup quarterback, right? And the backup quarterback is supposed to be holding the clipboard, mopping the floors, and staying out of the spotlight. And it would be the opposite with him. Plus, I was thinking about this. If you draft him and then you say, if you need a quarterback, your team probably isn't great. So you draft Shedeur and you have a bad season, and people are going to be talking about, is Deion going to be your next head coach, right? That's something you're going to have to deal with. Anything Deion says about the quarterbacking of your team, you're going to have to respond to. It's just not worth it. And now, if you're Cleveland and you're spending a 5th rounder on him, then maybe it is.
Yeah, I thought there were some interesting moments as picks started to come, and you saw Pittsburgh with an opportunity to draft him. They don't have a quarterback. And I kept thinking about Aaron Rodgers and how upset he was when Jordan Love got drafted by the Packers. And I thought, gosh, are the Steelers afraid to take a QB early because they don't want to tick Rodgers off and they're about to sign him? And then the Raiders come up, and the Raiders, in that 3rd round had a couple of picks late in that 3rd round. And I thought, well, here's the spot where Tom Brady has got a role with the Raiders. This is the spot where Tom Brady comes in and takes Shedeur because he knows Shedeur. He's been he's been mentoring Shedeur. And the fact that the Raiders passed on him, I thought was an indictment. Like Brady knows him, and Brady went, nuh-uh. We don't need it. We don't need this circus. We don't need the drama. Right. So
they passed on him 8 times. Yeah. When you include their trade, they passed on him 8 times.
Yeah. And when you see guys like Tyler Shuck, who, he's not a no-brainer to make it, and Dillon Gabriel, undersized. You see those guys go off the board in front of him, and Jackson Dart go off the board in front of him. You start to go, okay, wait a minute. there's a message being sent here by the GMs. And I think the message was, you're not good enough to act like that.
Yep.
And we don't need the drama. We got enough problems as it is. So we'll see what happens. I won't root against him.
No.
I think he's a fun player. I think he holds the ball too long. I think he's afraid to throw an incomplete pass because it hurts his stats. So he takes a sack instead. I think, in some ways, I think it's really selfish, but let's see what he does. Let's see if he's coachable. Let's see if he can play for somebody else. And, he may be a surprise, or he may end up like Aesop's Fables as a cautionary table to everybody who comes after him.
Could be. Hopefully he'll this will humble him a little bit, and he'll prove himself. Did you watch the NFL Network telecast or the ESPN telecast?
I watched both. I was kind of toggling around to see the difference.
What do you think about this was covered? Yeah. What do you think about the difference in the two?
Well, I thought there was a lot of apologist stuff going on, and there was a lot of pandering, and of course, people were upset that their own narratives weren't coming true. I think that all is disappointing, and I think a lot of the humor, like people, I think we were all kind of making fun of, he didn't get drafted in the first round. I had a tweet too where I said, look, at this point he should just go back to college. Oh wait, they retired his number. Like what a terrible spot he's in now. He can't go back to college, but after a while, I started to go, oh gosh, social media is just piling on. But what did you think of the difference in how it was covered? I thought it was a real disservice that in the first round, especially, it became this ongoing storyline. Oh, he hasn't been picked yet. And he was talked about more than, Cam Ward, who went number 1 overall.
Yes, he was. I thought that Mel Kiper embarrassed himself. And, it's kind of unfortunate. Kiper is the draft guru. He's done a lot for the popularity of the draft, but the stuff on ESPN was, I just thought that was borderline unprofessional, the way he was shilling for Shedeur. I also, I think about the part of this is the media. The story of how the media covered Shedeur and Dion and Colorado, in the fawning nature of it. Clearly, the NFL GMs did not have the same impression of Shedeur that the media did, right? The media collectively, because nobody had a first-round grade on him. Clearly, none of the teams that need quarterbacks had a first-round grade on him, and yet we saw him, especially until the last couple of weeks. Is he going to go top 5? The media covering Colorado is part of this story, I think, and I also think the retirement of the jersey. I'm sure it didn't have a direct impact on any decisions, but it certainly symbolizes the entitlement and the aura that I think a lot of teams wanted to avoid.
Yeah, well, let's face it. The media ecosystem becomes an echo chamber at times, and especially in a case like a draft, where you've got people mock drafting and they're comparing each other. They're peeking over at the other draft, and you start to get this real group think and this consensus building that is based on nothing more than media projection and hype and marketing, and what Sanders camp is saying about the player instead of what NFL GMs are actually thinking. And let's face it, the NFL GMs are not really going to say how they feel about Shedeur Sanders, because those picks are, there's value in those picks. They don't want to give away their hand at all. So they're not really going to say what they think about it. So you're right. Like there's this real echo chamber that happens where all of a sudden the narrative becomes something that is not real. And the NFL general managers, I actually don't think any of them thought he could play, and said, hey, not a first rounder, not a second rounder, not with my pick in the 3rd round. I'll start to think about him in the 4th or 5th round. And that's what happens. And so I think, I'll go back to what I said, like this is a merit-based league, and the teams that separate, it's amazing to me to watch the teams that tend to be at the top of the standings every year in and year out, and how much different they operate than the teams at the bottom. The desperation, the congruency of vision's not there at the bottom. A lot of turnover at the bottom with coaches and GMs. And I think people have wised up to this, and, they weren't going to waste a pick on a player they didn't think could help.
I thought ESPN's coverage was much more, fawning or Sanders centric than the NFL Network. I thought the NFL Network did a pretty good job in kind of tempering how they covered that story. And
Yeah.
that makes sense because ESPN has been the Colorado mouthpiece since he got there, right? I mean, and you would expect that. They have a financial stake in the Big 12 and in Colorado's ratings, and the the ESPN game telecasts of Colorado are often overly fawning of them. So to me, it kind of fit with what happened this weekend with the two networks, kind of fits with the way we have seen ESPN cover Colorado for the last 2 years.
I enjoyed Nick Saban most of all, and when people were talking, just hearing from a coach. But
Yeah.
you're right. There was a real feel on ESPN. It felt like Linsanity. It felt like Caitlin Clark. It felt like Tebow. They're shoveling coal at that point where they're going, hey, this is what the viewers want. They want to hear.
Yes.
They want controversy. This is outrageous. He's falling down the draft board. And meanwhile, the NFL GMs didn't look panicked at all. I don't think they were spending a whole bunch of time thinking about it.
The E stands for entertainment, right?
Ratings.
What else did you think?
Look, Cam Ward at number one. I got to talk about it. I mean, just what a good story it is because he had no stars. He was a 0-star high school quarterback who had no offers, who goes to Incarnate Word. For parents out there who are busy saying, oh my gosh, I need to get my kid noticed. I need to get my kid in front of scouts. I need to pay a scouting service. Cam Ward is a wonderful example of if you're good enough, they will find you. And they found him as his game increased and as he got better. Washington State found him and Miami found him. And then the Titans found him. I'm not sold that he's going to be the solution at quarterback. We've seen the Titans do this before, right? And being a number one pick for a team that's got a lot of problems isn't always great, right? So I don't know if he's going to pan out as a great QB, but what a good story. Loved his sort of his presentation and how he talked about his family and the humility. But great example of like, you don't need to be a 5-star guy to be the number one pick.
For sure. And we've seen that a bunch. He is probably the best example of it. I have a hard time unseeing the Cam Ward from Washington State, kind of those plays where what is he thinking? He comes across sometimes on the field like he's so casual. It's like he's playing catch in the backyard, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I think that's good in some ways, but I'm just not sure, about him. I think like you compare the past two drafts, I would have taken Caleb Williams, Drake May, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., J.J. McCarthy ahead of all the guys in this draft. And I'm not sure that Ward is going to end up being the best one in this draft as it is. It's just so interesting how the quarterback ebb and flow each year. And yet the one thing that remains the same is everybody wants them and everybody needs them.
Yeah. And you need them. And not lost here either that, last year it was Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, all guys who played in the Pac-12 going at the top of that draft. Then this year, what do you see at the top? It's Cam Ward, Washington State. It's Travis Hunter, Colorado. Two guys, 1-2. Pac-12 would have been sitting out there going, hey, we had the top 2 picks in the draft.
Yep. And awesome. Don't forget about, because I looked this up, Tanner McKee from Stanford and Dorian Thompson-Robinson from UCLA. So over the 3 seasons after USC and UCLA left for announced they were going to the Big Ten, the Pac-12 had 9 quarterbacks drafted, I believe.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Great success. Other things that I thought about, how talented Oregon was. I mean, I saw, in that first 3 rounds, I think it was like 8 Oregon players drafted, 2 in the first round with Josh Connerly, the big tackle going along with Derek Harmon. And Harmon's such a profound story with his mother on life support. He gets to tell her he was picked.
Yeah.
And then she passes away. Just heavy stuff and watching dreams come true. But, Oregon had the talent and then the SEC Big Ten, maybe you can get into this a little bit. 26 of the first 32 picks from those 2 conferences. What do you make of that?
And one of the picks in the first round was FCS. North Dakota State offensive lineman. So they were actually 26 out of the 31 players from the FBS were from those 2 leagues. I mean, that's what it's all about now. I mean, That is the new world order in college football, is those two conferences who were the best year in and year out before realignment. It's now consolidation has made it basically a two-conference race in something like the draft. I do have the tallies here for the most players picked for each by teams. Ohio State 14, Georgia 13, Texas 12, Oregon 10. So the Ducks, fourth highest total of players picked. Obviously, those were all playoff teams. And Oregon, I was thinking about watching all their players get picked, thinking, golly day, if they played any team but Ohio State, they got a great chance to advance deep in the playoff. And yet they got the wrong team on the wrong schedule, and that was it.
Is it going to get worse, Wilner, with the draft? And are we going to ever see a draft where, the entire first round is SEC and Big Ten? I mean, isn't the flow of talent already signaling that this is not a Power 4, this is a Power 2?
Well, it certainly is a Power 2, but I think that the revenue sharing, which in theory is going to start this summer, assuming the judge approves that lawsuit, the settlement, I think that the revenue sharing will keep things somewhat even, and combined with NIL, but we're never going to see a deal where the ACC and Big 12 are generating 8 or 10 picks in a first round. It's always going to be dominated by both those two, but I don't think we'll ever get to quite all of them. It's just like the playoff. They're going to have the most playoff teams. They're going to have the most ranked teams. They're going to have the most Heisman finalists. They're going to have the most draft picks, and it's going to be, a decisive difference, whereas some years in the past it hasn't been.
Will that cause apathy among fans? I'm curious to see how, I still think the college football playoff and the NCAA tournament, I almost want to divide that from this conversation and be like, well, of course, everyone will still watch the championship events. But I'm kind of wondering, like, how will it affect attendance at the stadium at schools that are not in those two conferences? How will it affect gift giving, viewership in those other conferences? I do think Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti need to be mindful of that. Like, they have to, like, they obviously work for their presidents and their schools, but I think they have to be mindful of the larger picture. And, we saw the CFP in its beginning in those first 10 or 12 years really not include the Pacific time zone. And I think that was hurting the sport. So, what happens when you start lopping off, portions of the country that don't feel like they're part of college football or can't get behind it. So I think there's a danger there. And I don't think it's an age thing. People keep saying older people. I'm hearing from younger people who are going, I'm struggling to stay engaged here because college football looks too much like everything else. Yep. And it's, it's just an amalgam of everything else.
Well, that is the real danger in what they're trying to do with the playoff starting in 2026, which is the automatic qualifiers, 14-team event where you've got 4 automatic bids for the SEC and 4 for the Big Ten. Before the first game is played, those two schools have got 8 out of the 14 spots locked up, even if their leagues aren't very good, even if they lose head-to-head to the ACC and Big 12. That is a huge danger because that will certainly impact the competitive value of the regular season, and that will cut right to the heart of college football and damage the product. So that's why, to me, that playoff issue with the AQs is really important for the future of the sport.
Yeah. And I'm going to just pivot back to, if you want to be the NFL, if you really want to be the NFL and you're college football, then look at what the NFL has done to create some parity, and look what it's done to create a playing field that can include the Kansas City Chiefs and the New York Giants having the same amount of money to spend. That's not what college football is trying to do. And so I think, in the end, it looks too much like the playground where the popular kids are lining up and stacking the teams so that they can win at recess. That's what it feels like to me right now. But I think you got to acknowledge even the NFL draft, 250,000 people in Green Bay showing up in a parking lot to hear names get read. It's phenomenal. I mean, they get it. and they've created something, that's magical. College football should not try to copy that. It should be its own thing.
Yeah. The NFL, they are just genius, right?
Yeah.
January's playoffs, February Super Bowl, March is the start of the league year and free agency, which is a huge story. April is the draft, huge story. May, did you notice they announced in the draft when the NFL schedule release is going to be on May 14th?
Yeah.
They just own the offseason and they know how to market in a way, college football isn't designed to, just because of the way it's structured. But boy, could learn something from the NFL on a lot of fronts.
All right. Hit that subscribe button if you are listening this on an audio podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe as well so you don't miss a thing. You can read my work at johncanzano.com. You can read his work at wilnerhotline.com, and we'll be back next week with an all-new episode and maybe some news on the Pac-12 front.
Maybe. We'll see. Thanks for listening.